The little girl's legs dangled from the witness chair, her feet nowhere near touching the ground. She looked even smaller than her 8 years, sitting there in a pink dress that her aunt had carefully picked out that morning. In her arms, she held a stuffed rabbit, its fur worn thin from years of being hugged too tight. The courtroom was packed. Every seat filled with people who had been following this case for months. Reporters sat with their notebooks ready. Television cameras lined the back wall. Everyone wanted to know what this child had seen on that terrible night 6 months ago. Judge Patricia Morrison looked down at the girl with kind eyes. The judge was a grandmother herself, and her heart ached seeing a child in such a difficult position. She had handled hundreds of cases in her 30 years on the bench, but this one was different. This one kept her awake at night. "Take your time, sweetheart," the judge said softly. "Nobody is going to rush you." The girl didn't respond. She hadn't spoken to anyone since that night. Not to the police officers who found her hiding in the closet. Not to the doctors at the hospital. Not to the therapists who tried every technique they knew. Not even to her Aunt Linda, who now took care of her and loved her like her own daughter. 6 months of complete silence. The case had become famous across the country. A home invasion gone wrong, they said. A man dead. A woman barely alive, spending weeks in the hospital fighting for every breath. And a little girl who saw it all but couldn't tell anyone what happened. The accused man sat at the defense table, his hands folded in front of him. Thomas Riley. He was 42 years old, a businessman who had known the family for years. The prosecution said he had broken into the house that night with terrible intentions. The defense said he was innocent, that he had tried to help, that he was being blamed for something he didn't do. The evidence was confusing. Thomas's fingerprints were everywhere in the house, but he claimed he visited often, so of course they would be. His clothes had been covered in blood when the police arrived, but he said he was trying to save the woman's life. The knife that killed the man had been wiped clean. The timeline didn't quite make sense. Without the girl's testimony, the prosecution's case had holes in it. Big holes. The kind that let guilty people go free. The defense lawyer had done a brilliant job creating doubt in the jury's minds. 3 weeks of trial, and it could all come down to whether this child could speak. The girl's aunt sat in the third row, crying quietly into a tissue. She had begged the prosecutors not to make the child testify. "She's been through enough," Linda had said over and over. But they had no choice. The truth was locked inside this little girl's mind, and without it, justice might never be served. The prosecutor, a woman named Catherine Chen, approached the witness stand slowly. She had spent hours with the girl over the past months, sitting quietly in the same room, never pushing, just being there. Sometimes she would read stories out loud. Sometimes she would just sit and do paperwork while the girl played with toys in the corner. Building trust took time, and Catherine had been patient. "Hello," Catherine said gently, crouching down so she was at eye level with the girl. "Do you remember me?" The girl looked at her with those big brown eyes but said nothing. "That's okay," Catherine continued. "You don't have to talk to me. You don't have to talk to anyone if you're not ready, but I want you to know something important. Everyone in this room cares about you. We all want to make sure you're safe, and we want to understand what happened that night." The defense attorney watched carefully. Robert Martinez was one of the best lawyers money could buy, and Thomas Riley's wealthy family had hired him to make sure their son walked free. Robert knew that if the girl spoke, everything could change. But he also knew that traumatized children often gave unreliable testimony. Memories could be confused. Details could be wrong. He was ready to challenge whatever she might say. The judge leaned forward. "Sweetheart, I know this is scary, but I need to know if you can help us understand what happened. Can you try to tell us what you saw?" The silence stretched on. 30 seconds, a minute. People in the courtroom began to shift in their seats. Maybe this wasn't going to work. Maybe the girl would never speak. Then something changed. The girl's aunt had pulled out a small photo from her purse. It was a picture of the girl with her mother, taken on a sunny day at the beach. They were both smiling, covered in sand, happy. Linda held it up where her niece could see it. The girl's eyes locked onto that photo. Tears started rolling down her cheeks. Her little hands gripped the stuffed rabbit tighter. "Mommy," she whispered. The word was so quiet that only the court reporter sitting closest to her heard it at first. But then she said it again, louder. "Mommy," the courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Morrison banged her gavel. Order! I want complete silence in this courtroom. Catherine Chen felt her heart racing. After 6 months of silence, the child was speaking. She had to be careful now. One wrong word, one wrong move, and the girl might retreat back into her protective shell. Yes, your mommy, Catherine said softly. We all want to help your mommy.
Can you tell us about that night?
The night when the police came to your house? The girl was trembling now. The memories were coming back, pushing through the walls she had built around them. Her therapist had warned everyone that this might happen. That one day, something would trigger those locked-away memories and they would all come flooding out at once. I saw, the girl whispered, her voice shaking. I saw what happened. Those 6 words changed everything. The jury sat up straighter. The defense attorney's confident expression faltered. Thomas Riley's face went pale. The reporters in the back row started typing furiously on their phones. Judge Morrison looked at the child with a mixture of hope and concern. You saw what happened that night? The girl nodded, tears streaming down her face now. I saw everything. But nobody asked me the right questions. Nobody understands. Catherine Chen's mind was racing. What did that mean? What had everyone missed? Can you help us understand? Catherine asked gently. Can you tell us what really happened? The girl looked around the courtroom at all the faces staring at her. She looked at Thomas Riley sitting at the defense table. She looked at her aunt who was crying and nodding encouragement. She looked at the judge who had been nothing but kind to her. Then she took a deep breath and started to speak. And what she said in the next few minutes would shock everyone in that courtroom and change the course of the entire trial. But first, she needed them to understand how it all began. Not on that terrible night, but months before, when the cracks in her family started to show. 18 months before that courtroom day, life had been different. Not perfect, but different. The girl lived with her mom in a small house on Maple Street, the kind of neighborhood where everyone knew everyone else's business. Her mom worked 2 jobs to keep them afloat after the divorce from her real father 3 years earlier. Her name was Sophie, though everyone called her Soph. She loved drawing pictures and playing in the backyard. She was good at math and terrible at sitting still during reading time. She was, in most ways, just a regular kid trying to figure out the world. Then her mom met David. David seemed nice at first. He had a big smile and always brought gifts when he visited. He fixed the broken shelf in the kitchen that had been hanging crooked for months. He made her mom laugh in a way Sophie hadn't heard in years. Her mom seemed lighter somehow, like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. They got married after dating for 6 months. Sophie's mom said it was fast, but when you know, you know. Sophie wasn't sure what that meant, but she liked seeing her mom happy. David moved into their house, and suddenly their life had more money in it. Nice dinners, new clothes, a bigger television. But happiness has a funny way of showing its cracks when you look close enough. The first time Sophie noticed something was wrong, she was supposed to be asleep. It was late on a Tuesday night, maybe around 11. She'd gotten up to get water and heard voices coming from her mom's bedroom. Not talking voices. Angry voices. You don't get to tell me what to do, her mom was saying, her voice sharp in a way Sophie had never heard before. I'm your husband now. This is my house too. David responded, his voice low and mean. Sophie stood frozen in the hallway, her empty cup in her hand. She didn't go get the water. She went back to bed and pulled the covers over her head. The next morning, her mom had a bruise on her arm. I bumped into the door, she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You know how clumsy I am. Sophie was 8 years old, but she wasn't stupid. Doors don't leave fingerprint-shaped bruises. Things got worse slowly, like a pot of water heating up 1 degree at a time. David's nice mask started to slip. He would snap at her mom over small things like dinner being 5 minutes late or the house not being clean enough. He started controlling the money, asking her mom to explain every dollar she spent. He didn't like it when her mom talked to her old friends. Sophie learned to be quiet. She learned to disappear into her room when David came home in a bad mood. She learned to read the tension in the air, the way you can smell rain before it falls. Her mom tried to hide it from her, but Sophie saw everything. The way her mom flinched sometimes when David moved too fast. The way she started wearing long sleeves even on hot days. The way her smile became something she put on like a costume, fake and uncomfortable. Then Thomas Riley entered their lives. Thomas was David's business partner. They ran some kind of investment company together, though Sophie never really understood what they did. Something with money and computers and a lot of phone calls. Thomas came over for dinner sometimes and for business meetings in David's home office. Thomas was different from David. He was quieter, gentler. He always asked Sophie about school and actually listened to her answers. He brought her books instead of toys. Good books that she actually wanted to read. He never yelled, never slammed doors, never made people feel small. Sophie noticed the way Thomas looked at her mom. Not in a creepy way, but in a sad way. Like he could see the same thing Sophie saw. Like he wished he could help but didn't know how. She also noticed the way her mom looked at Thomas when she thought nobody was watching. There was something there, something unspoken. Not an affair, not anything physical that Sophie ever saw, but an emotional connection, a lifeline to someone who treated her mom like a human being instead of property. David noticed it too. The fights got worse. David accused her mom of cheating even though Sophie knew she wasn't. David would look through her mom's phone, demanding to know why Thomas had called about work. He started showing up at her mom's job unexpectedly, checking on her. The control got tighter and tighter, like a rope slowly strangling them all. Sophie's mom tried to leave once. Sophie remembered that day clearly. It was a Saturday morning, and her mom had packed 2 suitcases while David was out. She told Sophie they were going to stay with Aunt Linda for a while, maybe longer. They got as far as the driveway. David came home early. There was screaming. The suitcases got thrown across the front yard, clothes spilling out onto the grass. The neighbors pretended not to see. Sophie sat in the back of the car crying while her mom tried to calm David down. They didn't leave that day, or any day after that, but her mom didn't give up. She got smarter about it. She started hiding money, a little bit at a time. She talked to a lawyer on her lunch breaks at work. She made plans quietly, carefully. Sophie knew because her mom told her one night, holding her tight and whispering promises that they would get out soon. They just had to be patient. They just had to wait for the right moment. Thomas knew too. He must have known. Sophie had overheard a phone conversation once, her mom's voice hushed but urgent. "I'm working on it," she had said. "I just need a little more time to get everything in order. I need to protect Sophie first." Sophie didn't know if her mom was talking to Thomas, but she had a feeling. David found out about the planning. Sophie didn't know how he discovered it, but he did. Maybe he went through her mom's things. Maybe he checked the computer history and found the searches for divorce lawyers and women's shelters. Maybe someone told him. The night everything changed started like any other night. Sophie had gone to bed at her normal time after finishing her homework. Her mom had tucked her in, kissed her forehead, told her she loved her. Nothing seemed different. Nothing seemed wrong, but Sophie couldn't sleep. She never slept well anymore in that house. It was like her body was always waiting for something bad to happen, always on alert. Around 10:30, she heard the front door open and close. Heavy footsteps, voices, David's voice and another man's voice. Thomas was there. At first, it sounded like a normal conversation. Business stuff. But then the voices got louder. David was yelling. Thomas was trying to speak calmly, trying to de-escalate whatever was happening. Her mom's voice joined in, pleading. Sophie got out of bed and crept to her bedroom door. She opened it just a crack, just enough to see down the stairs into the living room. What she saw would haunt her forever. David had papers in his hand, waving them around. Bank statements maybe, or lawyer documents. Sophie couldn't tell from where she was, but whatever they were, they had made David furious in a way she had never seen before. "You were planning to leave me?" David screamed at her mom. "After everything I've done for you? After I saved you from your pathetic life?" Her mom was crying, backing away. "David, please, can we just talk about this calmly?" "And you," David turned on Thomas. "My business partner, my friend. You were helping her, weren't you? You were in on this whole plan." Thomas held up his hands. "David, listen to me. Let's all just take a breath and discuss this like adults." But David was past listening. The rage had taken over completely, wiping away any humanity that might have been left in him. He was like a storm that had been building for months, finally breaking free. Sophie watched in frozen terror as David grabbed her mom by the arm, yanking her toward him. Her mom cried out in pain. Thomas stepped forward, trying to intervene, and that's when everything exploded into chaos. Sophie wanted to scream, to run down and help her mom, to do something, but her body wouldn't move. She was paralyzed by fear, by the horror of watching her family destroy itself in real time. The violence that unfolded in those next few minutes was something no child should ever witness. Sophie's mind tried to protect her, tried to make her look away, but she couldn't. Her eyes stayed glued to the scene, recording every terrible moment even as her brain screamed at her to stop watching. She saw David hit her mom. She saw her mom fall to the ground. She saw Thomas try to pull David away. She saw the two men fighting, crashing into furniture, knocking over lamps. She heard her mom screaming for them to stop. Then she saw the knife. The knife came from their own kitchen. Sophie recognized it immediately. It was the big one, the one her mom used to cut watermelon in the summer. She had used it just that morning to slice bread for sandwiches. Now David held it in his hand. Sophie's heart felt like it was going to explode out of her chest. Every instinct told her to run, to hide, to get away. But she couldn't leave. That was her mom down there. That was her mom in danger. "David, put the knife down," Thomas said, his voice steady despite the fear Sophie could see in his eyes. "This isn't you. You don't want to do something you can't take back." Her mom was on the floor, bleeding from her nose, trying to crawl away. "Please," she begged. "Please, David, think about Sophie. She's upstairs. She could wake up. Please don't do this." David's laugh was cold, empty. "Sophie, you were going to take Sophie away from me. Make me look like the bad guy. Turn her against me. You are the bad guy." The words burst from her mom's mouth before she could stop them. Sometimes the truth just demands to be spoken, even at the worst possible moment. David's face twisted with rage. He moved toward her mom with the knife raised. Thomas didn't think. He just reacted. He threw himself between David and Sophie's mom, grabbing David's arm, trying to wrestle the knife away. The two men crashed backward into the coffee table, wood splintering under their weight. They rolled on the floor, fighting for control of the knife. Sophie watched Thomas's hand close around David's wrist, trying to force him to drop the weapon. Her mom was screaming, trying to get up but falling back down. She was hurt worse than Sophie had realized. Maybe a broken rib from when David had hit her. Maybe something internal. Sophie could see blood on her mom's shirt spreading like spilled paint. "Call the police," her mom screamed. "Sophie, if you can hear me, call 911. But Sophie couldn't move. Her legs felt like concrete. Her hands shook so badly she couldn't have dialed a phone even if she had one. She was 8 years old, watching her whole world fall apart, and all she could do was stand there and witness it. The fight between David and Thomas grew more desperate. They knocked over a lamp. They crashed into the wall, leaving a dent in the drywall. David was bigger and stronger, but Thomas was fighting with the energy of someone who knew this was life or death. Thomas managed to twist David's arm, and the knife clattered to the floor between them. Both men lunged for it at the same time. Thomas got there first. He grabbed the knife and rolled away, getting to his feet. He was breathing hard, his shirt torn, a cut on his forehead dripping blood into his eyes. "Stay back," he warned David. "I don't want to hurt you, but I will protect her." David should have backed off then. Any rational person would have. But rage makes people do irrational things. Rage makes people throw away their own survival instinct. David charged at Thomas like a bull, roaring with fury. Thomas didn't want to use the knife. Sophie could see it in his face, the horror and reluctance. He held it out in front of him defensively, trying to ward David off, trying to make him stop. But David didn't stop. He ran right into it. The knife went into David's stomach. Not deep, not immediately fatal. Just enough to stop his forward momentum. David froze, his eyes going wide with shock and pain. He looked down at the wound, then up at Thomas, then down at the wound again, like his brain couldn't process what had just happened. Thomas pulled the knife out, stumbling backward. "Oh God," he said. "Oh God, I didn't mean to. I was just trying to—" David fell to his knees, holding his stomach. Blood seeped between his fingers. "You stabbed me," he said, his voice full of disbelief. "You actually stabbed me." Her mom had crawled to the wall, using it to pull herself up to a sitting position. She was crying, gasping for breath, her face a mask of pain and terror. Thomas dropped the knife like it had burned him. "I need to call an ambulance," he said, pulling out his phone with shaking hands. "I need to—" But David wasn't done. Even wounded, even bleeding, his rage hadn't burned out. He looked at Sophie's mom sitting against the wall, vulnerable and hurt. He looked at Thomas, distracted with the phone. And he made one last terrible decision. David lunged forward, going for the knife on the floor. Her mom saw him moving, saw where he was going, saw what he was planning to do, and something in her snapped. Something that had been bent and broken by months of abuse, by years of being made to feel small and powerless. by the terror of almost dying on her own living room floor. She was closer to the knife than David was. Her hand closed around the handle just as David reached for it. And before Thomas could stop her, before anyone could stop her, she drove that knife into David's chest, once, twice, 3 times. The first stab was survival. The second was rage. The third was every bit of pain and humiliation and fear she had endured coming out in one explosive moment. David collapsed completely, blood spreading across the hardwood floor her mom had cleaned just that morning. His breathing became ragged, wet-sounding. His eyes lost focus. Her mom dropped the knife and stared at her hands covered in her husband's blood. "What did I do?" she whispered. "Oh God, what did I do?" Thomas stood frozen, the phone still in his hand, the 911 operator's voice tiny and distant asking what the emergency was. He looked at David dying on the floor. He looked at Sophie's mom, who was going into shock. He looked at his own hands, also covered in blood from the first wound he had inflicted. Then he did something that would cost him dearly. "I did it," Thomas said into the phone, his voice clear and decisive. "I stabbed him. Send an ambulance and police to 47 Maple Street. A man is dying. Please hurry." Sophie's mom looked at him in confusion. "Thomas, no. Listen to me," Thomas said urgently, kneeling beside her. "You have a daughter. She needs you. If you go to prison, what happens to her? She'll be alone. I don't have kids. I don't have anyone depending on me. I can say it was self-defense. I was protecting you. The first stab was accidental during the fight. Let me take responsibility for this. But you didn't." "It doesn't matter," Thomas insisted. "What matters is Sophie. Think about Sophie." And that's when he looked up and saw her. Sophie standing at the top of the stairs in her pajamas, her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest, her face wet with tears. Their eyes met, and in that moment Thomas realized the fatal flaw in his plan. There was a witness who had seen everything. Sophie's mom turned and saw her daughter. The horror on her face was worse than anything that had happened with David, worse than the violence, worse than the blood. Seeing her daughter standing there, having witnessed it all, broke something in her that would never fully heal. "Sophie," her mom gasped. "Baby, go back to bed, please just go back to bed." But Sophie couldn't move. She was in shock, her young mind trying to process images and sounds and emotions that were far too big for her to carry. Her brain was starting to shut down, putting up walls, locking doors, protecting her from memories that could destroy her. The sirens started in the distance, growing louder, coming closer. Thomas walked to the bottom of the stairs and looked up at Sophie. "I'm sorry you had to see this," he said gently. "I'm so sorry, but I need you to listen to me very carefully. Can you do that?" Sophie didn't respond. She was starting to retreat into herself, her eyes going glassy and distant. "Your mom didn't do anything wrong," Thomas continued, speaking quickly, urgently. "She was defending herself. But sometimes the police don't understand that. Sometimes the system doesn't protect the people who need protecting. Do you understand?" Sophie stared at him blankly. "I'm going to tell the police that I did this, all of it. And if anyone asks you what happened, you don't have to say anything. You can stay quiet. You can protect your mom by staying quiet. Can you do that?" The sirens were right outside now. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows. Car doors slammed. Footsteps rushed toward the house. Sophie's mom tried to stand up but collapsed back down. She was hurt too badly. She needed a hospital. Thomas knew she might not even survive the night. "I love you, baby," her mom called up to Sophie, her voice weak and fading. "I love you so much. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry you saw this. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you better." The front door burst open. Police officers flooded in, guns drawn, shouting commands. They saw David on the floor, clearly dead or dying. They saw Sophie's mom against the wall, covered in blood. They saw Thomas standing in the middle of it all, also covered in blood, the knife nearby. "Hands up. Get on the ground, now." Thomas complied immediately, laying face down on the floor, hands behind his head. Sophie watched them handcuff him, watched them call for medics, watched them carefully approach her mom. An officer spotted Sophie on the stairs. A woman officer, young with kind eyes despite the terrible scene she was processing. She holstered her weapon and slowly climbed the stairs. "Hi, sweetheart," the officer said softly. "My name is Officer Reynolds. Are you hurt?" Sophie didn't answer. She couldn't. The words were locked inside. Now, sitting in that witness chair 6 months later, Sophie remembered everything. The walls her mind had built to protect her were crumbling. The memories were flooding back, sharp and clear and terrible. Judge Morrison watched the little girl carefully. She had seen witnesses break down before, but there was something different about this. Something was shifting in the child's expression. The blankness was giving way to clarity. The silence was about to end. "I saw what happened," Sophie said again, louder this time. Her hands gripped the stuffed rabbit so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "But nobody understands. Nobody asked me the right questions." Catherine Chen, the prosecutor, felt her pulse quicken. This was it. This was the moment that could make or break the case. She had to be careful, had to let Sophie speak at her own pace without leading her or putting words in her mouth. "We're listening now," Catherine said gently. "What is it that we don't understand?" Sophie looked directly at Thomas Riley at the defense table. He met her eyes with an expression of such sadness and resignation that it made several jurors uncomfortable. He knew what was coming. He had known since the moment he saw Sophie at the top of those stairs that his sacrifice might not work. "Mr. Riley didn't kill David," Sophie said. Her child's voice rang out clear in the silent courtroom. "He was trying to help my mom. David had the knife first. He was going to hurt my mom, maybe kill her. Mr. Riley was protecting her." A wave of whispers rolled through the courtroom. The defense attorney, Robert Martinez, leaned forward with sudden interest. This wasn't what he expected. The girl was supporting their case. This could change everything, but Catherine Chen felt a cold dread in her stomach. Something about the way Sophie said it, the specific wording, the look in her eyes. There was more. "There had to be more, Sophie," Catherine said carefully. "Can you tell us exactly what you saw?" "From the beginning?" Sophie took a shaky breath. Then, in a voice that sounded far older than her 8 years, she began to tell the truth. The whole truth. Not the version Thomas had told the police. Not the version he had been telling his lawyers for 6 months. The real version. She described hiding at the top of the stairs. She described watching David attack her mom. She described Thomas trying to break up the fight. She described the struggle for the knife. The first stab wound that Thomas had accidentally inflicted while defending himself and her mom. The jury listened with growing horror as this child recounted details no child should know. The way blood looks when it spreads across a floor. The sound a person makes when they're fighting for their life. The exact moment when someone's eyes change from angry to afraid. Thomas sat perfectly still, his expression neutral, but tears were sliding down his face. His attorney had stopped taking notes. Even the judge had gone pale. Then Sophie got to the part that changed everything. "David was hurt, but he wasn't dead," Sophie said. "He went for the knife again. He was going to get up and hurt my mom more. I could see it in his face. He wasn't going to stop. Even bleeding, even stabbed, he wasn't going to stop until she was dead." The courtroom held its breath. "My mom got the knife first," Sophie continued, her voice breaking now. "She stabbed him 3 more times. Mr. Riley didn't do that part. My mom did." The explosion of noise was immediate. People gasping, shouting questions, the jury members looking at each other in shock. Judge Morrison banged her gavel repeatedly, demanding order. Sophie's Aunt Linda was sobbing in the gallery, her hand over her mouth. She had suspected there was more to the story, but hearing it from Sophie's mouth made it real in a way that devastated her. Robert Martinez was on his feet immediately. "Your Honor, I move for an immediate dismissal of all murder charges against my client. This testimony clearly establishes—" "Sit down, Mr. Martinez," Judge Morrison ordered. "We will address motions after the witness has finished testifying." Catherine Chen's world was spinning. Her case had just imploded. No, worse than that. Her case had just revealed that they had been prosecuting the wrong person, or at least prosecuting them for the wrong crime. This changed everything about the charges, the evidence, the entire narrative of what happened that night. But her job right now wasn't to protect her case. It was to get to the truth. And the truth was pouring out of this traumatized child like water from a broken dam. "Sophie," Catherine said, her voice thick with emotion, "why didn't you tell anyone this before? Why did you stay quiet for 6 months?" Sophie's tears came harder now. "Because Mr. Riley told me to protect my mom. He said if I stayed quiet, my mom wouldn't go to jail. He said she needed me. And I was so scared that if I told the truth, they would take my mom away forever and I would be all alone." She looked at Thomas again. "Mr. Riley was trying to help us. Even after everything that happened, even covered in blood, even when the police were arresting him, he was still trying to protect my mom. He told them he did it all. He lied to save her. Thomas nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth of her words. His lawyer looked like someone had hit him with a brick. All their defense strategy, all their arguments about self-defense and protecting Sophie's mom, all of it was true, but it was also incomplete. "Your mom is alive, Sophie," Judge Morrison said gently. "She survived her injuries. She's been in a medical facility recovering." "Did you know that?" Sophie nodded. "Aunt Linda told me, but she said Mom couldn't come see me yet, that Mom was too sick, that she needed to heal." What Sophie didn't know, what she was too young to fully understand, was that her mom hadn't just been physically injured that night. The psychological trauma had been severe. Sophie's mom had been in a psychiatric facility, unable to cope with what she had done, what her daughter had witnessed, the guilt that consumed her. The doctors said she would recover eventually, but recovery takes time and justice doesn't always wait. "Sophie," Catherine said, "I need to ask you something very important. When your mom stabbed David those last times, was she defending herself? Was David still a threat?" This was the crucial question. The difference between justified self-defense and manslaughter or murder. The line that determined whether Sophie's mom would face serious prison time or something lesser. Sophie thought carefully. At 8 years old, she was being asked to make a judgment that experienced lawyers and judges spent hours debating. But she had been there. She had seen it. The first time Mom stabbed him, yes, Sophie said slowly. David was reaching for the knife. He was going to hurt her more. But the second and third time, she trailed off, struggling with how to explain what she had seen. "It's okay," Catherine encouraged. "Just tell us what you saw." The second and third time, I think she was just angry and scared and hurt. David was already falling down. He probably couldn't get back up. But Mom kept going, like she couldn't stop herself. Like everything he had done to her for so long just came out all at once. It was the most honest, devastating testimony Catherine had ever heard. This child had just described the gray area where self-defense bleeds into something else. Where justified violence crosses a line. Where victims become perpetrators not because they're evil, but because trauma and terror and rage can overwhelm reason. The defense attorney stood again. "Your Honor, I renew my motion to dismiss. Even accepting the child's testimony as completely accurate, it's clear that my client acted purely in self-defense during his confrontation with the deceased. Whatever happened after that is separate from his actions." The judge looked exhausted. This case had just become exponentially more complicated. "I'm going to call a recess. We need time to process this testimony and determine how to proceed. The jury is dismissed for today. Court will reconvene tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. As the gavel fell, Sophie started crying harder. "Is my mom going to go to jail? Did I just send my mom to jail by telling the truth?" Catherine knelt beside the witness stand. "You did the right thing, Sophie. You told the truth. That's all anyone can ask of you. And no matter what happens, you're going to be okay. Your Aunt Linda loves you, and she's going to take care of you." But Sophie wasn't consoled. "Mr. Riley was trying to help us. He was going to go to jail to protect my mom, and I just ruined everything." Thomas stood up, his handcuffs clinking. A bailiff moved to escort him back to his cell, but Thomas shook his head. "Please," he said to the judge, "just let me say something to her." Judge Morrison hesitated, then nodded. "Keep it brief." Thomas walked to the witness stand, the bailiff staying close. He looked down at Sophie with those same kind eyes that had brought her books and listened to her talk about school. "You didn't ruin anything," Thomas said firmly. "You told the truth." "That's brave." "That's right. I made my choices that night. I chose to protect your mom because she's a good person who was in a terrible situation. And if I had to do it all over again, I would make the same choice. But you're in jail because of me staying quiet." Sophie sobbed. "I'm in jail because I chose to take responsibility for something I didn't entirely do," Thomas corrected gently. "That was my decision, not yours. And honestly, Sophie, I'm glad you finally spoke up. The truth matters. It always matters." He glanced at the prosecutor, then back at Sophie. "Your mom made a mistake that night, but she was hurt and scared and traumatized. She spent months, maybe years, being hurt by a man who was supposed to love her. Sometimes people break under that kind of pressure. It doesn't make them bad people. It makes them human. The 3 days after Sophie's testimony were chaos. The legal system, which usually moves slowly and deliberately, suddenly had to scramble to address a case that had been turned completely upside down. The prosecution brought in additional charges against Sophie's mom, who was still in the psychiatric facility. The defense filed motion after motion to get Thomas's charges reduced or dismissed. Medical experts were called in to evaluate Sophie's testimony and determine if it was reliable. Child psychologists analyzed whether an 8-year-old could accurately remember events from 6 months ago, especially traumatic events. Sophie herself was put through gentle but thorough questioning by court-appointed specialists. They showed her pictures, asked her to draw what she remembered, had her repeat her story in different ways to check for consistency. It was exhausting and re-traumatizing, but necessary. The findings were clear. Sophie's memory was remarkably accurate. The details she provided matched the physical evidence in ways she couldn't have known, unless she had actually witnessed everything. The blood spatter patterns, the location of wounds, the broken furniture, the timeline, it all fit with what she described. More importantly, Sophie's story explained inconsistencies that had bothered investigators from the beginning. Why Thomas's story about defending Sophie's mom seemed true but incomplete. Why the knife had been wiped clean in some places but not others. Why Sophie's mom had been found in a different position than Thomas initially described. The media had a field day. National news outlets camped outside the courthouse. Legal experts debated the case on television. Everyone had an opinion about what should happen to the woman who killed her abuser, the man who tried to protect her, and the child caught in the middle of it all. Public opinion was divided. Some people saw Sophie's mom as a hero who fought back against a monster. Others saw her as someone who crossed the line from self-defense into revenge. Some praised Thomas for his sacrifice. Others criticized him for lying to police and obstructing justice, even if his motives were good. But Sophie didn't watch the news or read the headlines. She stayed with Aunt Linda, going to therapy 3 times a week, trying to process everything she had been through. Aunt Linda had created a safe, quiet space for her niece, protecting her from the media circus as much as possible. On the 4th day after Sophie's testimony, something happened that nobody expected. Sophie's mom asked to be brought to the courthouse. She had been cleared by her doctors to testify, though they warned that it might set back her recovery. She insisted anyway. The courtroom was packed again when Sophie's mom was brought in. She looked different than she had 6 months ago. Thinner, paler, older somehow. Her eyes had a haunted quality that made people look away, but she was composed and determined. She took the witness stand and confirmed everything Sophie had said. Every detail. She didn't try to minimize what she had done or make excuses. She told the truth plainly, her voice steady even as tears ran down her face. "David was my husband and I loved him once," she said. "But he became someone I didn't recognize, someone who hurt me physically and emotionally for months. I tried to leave. I planned to leave. But I wasn't fast enough." She described the night of the incident from her perspective, the terror of being attacked in her own home, the relief when Thomas intervened, the horror of watching the 2 men fight over the knife, the moment when David's wound didn't stop him, when he reached for that knife again with murder in his eyes. "I grabbed the knife first," she said, "and the first time I used it I was protecting myself. David was reaching for me. He was going to hurt me more, maybe kill me. I believed that with everything in me." She paused, wiping her eyes. "But the second and third time, I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I was angry. I was hurt. I was thinking about every bruise, every insult, every time he made me feel worthless and afraid. And I wanted him to stop existing. I wanted the nightmare to end. So I stabbed him again even though he was already dying." The honesty was stunning. Sophie's mom wasn't trying to get away with anything. She was taking full responsibility for her actions, while also explaining the context that led to them. "Thomas tried to protect me even after I did that," she continued. "He told the police he was responsible for all of it. He was willing to go to prison for something I did because he knew I had a daughter who needed me. That's the kind of person Thomas is. Someone who sees someone else's pain and tries to help, even at great cost to himself." She looked directly at the jury. "I don't know what the right punishment is for what I did. I killed my husband. Not entirely in self-defense, even though he was trying to kill me first. I let a good man take the blame for my actions. I traumatized my daughter in the worst possible way. Those are facts I have to live with every day. Her voice broke. But I want you to understand something. I'm not a monster. I'm a woman who was pushed past her breaking point. I'm a mother who was trying to survive so I could be there for my child. And I'm a human being who made a terrible mistake in the worst moment of her life. When she finished testifying, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. Even the judge had to take a moment to compose herself before proceeding. The prosecutors, after consultation with their superiors and consideration of all the evidence, made a decision. They dropped the murder charges against Thomas entirely. They offered him a plea deal on lesser charges related to providing false information to police. Given the circumstances, they recommended probation rather than prison time. Thomas accepted the deal immediately. He had no interest in fighting for his freedom at the expense of Sophie or her mom. For Sophie's mom, the decision was more complicated. The prosecutors charged her with voluntary manslaughter rather than murder. They acknowledged the context of domestic violence and the fact that she had been genuinely defending herself initially, but they also couldn't ignore that she had continued the attack beyond what was necessary for self-defense. Her lawyer negotiated a plea agreement. Sophie's mom pleaded guilty to manslaughter. In exchange, the prosecution recommended a sentence that took into account the years of abuse she had endured, her mental state at the time, her genuine remorse, and most importantly, the fact that she had a young daughter who needed her. The judge, after hearing statements from domestic violence experts, psychologists, and considering hundreds of letters from abuse survivors who saw themselves in Sophie's mom's story, made her ruling: 8 years in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 3 years. Additionally, intensive therapy and domestic violence counseling, and once released, supervised visitation with Sophie until therapists determined that the relationship was healthy and stable. It wasn't a perfect solution. Sophie's mom would miss years of her daughter's childhood. Sophie would grow up with her mother in prison. But it was more merciful than what many people in her situation received. When the sentence was announced, Sophie's mom didn't react with anger or despair. She simply nodded, accepting the consequences of her actions. She looked up at the gallery where Aunt Linda sat with Sophie and mouthed the words, "I love you." Sophie, who had been brought to court for the sentencing, stood up. Before anyone could stop her, she ran down the aisle toward the front of the courtroom. Bailiffs moved to intercept her, but the judge held up her hand. "Let her go," Judge Morrison said quietly. Sophie ran to her mother, who was standing at the defense table. Her mom dropped to her knees and wrapped Sophie in her arms, both of them crying. For a moment, the courtroom, the cameras, the lawyers, all of it faded away. It was just a mother and daughter saying goodbye before a long separation. "I'm so sorry," her mom whispered into Sophie's hair. "I'm so sorry for everything. For not leaving sooner. For that night. For not protecting you better. I love you, Mommy," Sophie said through her tears. "I'll wait for you. I'll write you letters every week." Aunt Linda promised. "I love you too, baby. More than anything in the world. And I'm going to get better. I'm going to work hard and get healthy so that when I come back, I can be the mom you deserve." They held each other for several more minutes before the bailiffs gently separated them. Sophie's mom was led away, looking back one last time at her daughter before disappearing through the door that led to the holding cells. Thomas approached Sophie and Aunt Linda as they prepared to leave the courtroom. "I'm sorry it ended this way," he said. "I had hoped to spare both of you from all of this." Aunt Linda surprised him by hugging him. "You tried to protect them. That's more than most people would do. Thank you for that." Sophie looked up at Thomas. "Are you going to be okay?" Thomas smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I think so eventually, are you?" Sophie thought about it. "I don't know yet. My therapist says it's okay not to know." "Your therapist is right," Thomas said. "And Sophie? What you did, telling the truth even though it was scary, that took real courage. You should be proud of yourself." Over the following months and years, life slowly found a new normal for everyone involved. Sophie continued therapy and gradually returned to being a kid. She struggled sometimes with nightmares and anxiety, but Aunt Linda was patient and loving. She made sure Sophie knew she was safe, that she was loved, that none of what happened was her fault. True to her word, Sophie wrote her mom letters every week. At first they were simple, talking about school and friends. But as she got older, the letters became deeper, working through her feelings about that night and everything that came after. Her mom responded to every single letter, watching her daughter grow up through words on paper. She attended every therapy session she was offered, worked with domestic violence counselors, confronted her own trauma and the choices she had made. She counted down the days until she could hold her daughter again. Thomas went back to his life, though it was changed forever. He lost his business partnership and most of his friends. Some people saw him as a hero, but others saw him as someone who had obstructed justice even if his intentions were good. He started volunteering with domestic violence organizations, using his experience to help others understand the complexities of abuse and survival. The case became a landmark example in legal circles. Law school studied it. It sparked conversations about how the justice system handles domestic violence cases, how trauma affects witnesses, especially children, and where the line is between self-defense and revenge. 3 years after sentencing, Sophie's mom came up for parole. Sophie, now 11 years old, wrote a letter to the parole board. In it, she talked about how her mom had made a terrible mistake, but was still a good person. How she had been growing up without her mother but wanted her back. How she understood what had happened better now that she was older. The parole board approved her release. The day Sophie's mom walked out of prison, Sophie was there with Aunt Linda. When they saw each other, they both ran. They met in the middle, holding each other and crying. 3 years of separation ending in that moment. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. Sophie's mom had to live with supervised visitation at first. She had to find a job with a criminal record. She had to rebuild trust with her daughter slowly, one day at a time. The trauma didn't just disappear because she was free, but it was a beginning, a chance to heal, a chance to be a family again, different than before but still together. Sophie kept the stuffed rabbit she had held in the courtroom that day. It sat on her shelf as a reminder of the hardest thing she ever had to do, telling the truth even when it hurt, even when it cost her something precious. Years later, when Sophie was grown, she would tell people that the day she testified was the day she learned what courage really meant. Not the absence of fear, but doing what's right despite being terrified, not protecting yourself, but protecting the truth even when it's painful. She learned that justice is complicated, that people can be both victims and perpetrators, that love and violence can exist in the same relationship, and that healing is possible even from the worst trauma. Most importantly, she learned that speaking up matters, that silence protects abusers, that children deserve to be heard, and that sometimes, even when everything feels broken beyond repair, truth can be the first step toward making things whole again. The courtroom where it all happened eventually held other trials, other testimonies, other attempts to find justice in an imperfect world. But people who were there that day never forgot the little girl who found her voice and changed everything. They never forgot her courage. And neither did she.